Good afternoon to you. 506 here, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. Coming up this hour, Joe Simonson is with us. We'll talk about the left's attack on Israel. Is here in the United States, a lot of people glorifying a terror attack. Nuts. And Joe's got the details. He's reporting it out. We'll talk to him about that. You can join us at 888-630-9625. 888-630-WMAL. New York Congressman Jamal Bowman, of course, in the news this week, because he had to plead guilty to a misdemeanor for yanking a fire alarm when there was no fire. He was causing a lot of trouble in Congress amid an important House vote on a critical government funding bill, as the Washington Examiner points out in its coverage this week. Bowman is now set to pay a $1,000 fine after he was charged with the misdemeanor in Washington, D.C. Superior Court with willfully and knowingly giving a false alarm of a fire in violation of city code. As a part of his plea agreement, he's also required to write and deliver an apology letter. What is he, a kid? He's like, this is the kind of thing you do, like if a 12-year-old pulls a fire alarm. You will write an apology letter to the principal. You will tell them you will never do this again. So Jamal Bowman gets the 12-year-old treatment. You have to write and deliver an apology letter to the U.S. Capitol Police Chief. Bowman will have a sentencing hearing that takes place in 3 months. That's on January 29th, but the charge will be dropped at the time of the hearing as long as he follows the terms of his agreement, which presumably means don't pull any more fire alarms. Jamal Bowman, you'll recall, has said that, I was just in a rush to vote, that's all.
Stand by your statement that pulling the fire alarm was an accident.
You know, I don't know why this has gotten so much attention. I was literally just in a rush to go vote, man. That's all it was.
Are you afraid of any repercussions, either from leadership or from legally from Capitol Police?
I mean, listen, I take responsibility for what I did.
Yeah, okay. So I was just in a rush to vote. I take responsibility for what I did. Who can blame me, honestly? I was rushing. So that involves pulling fire alarms? Does that make any sense to you at all? Yesterday, after pleading guilty to yanking the fire alarm, he had some remarks from reporters.
As I said from the very beginning, I was not trying to disrupt any congressional proceedings. I'm glad that the investigation yielded that. And so it's against D.C. law, and I got to take responsibility for it, which I'm here to do. And looking forward to just, you know, taking a deal, paying the fine, and in 3 months this being dismissed and continuing my work.
A lot of folks
What a sweet deal, by the way. What a sweet deal for this guy. You know? How many years in prison did Jacob Chansley get, the guy who dressed up as a Viking and stood on the Senate dais? He didn't pull any fire alarms.
Oh, why you didn't tell anybody when you pulled it?
Yeah, I mean, you remember that day, right? It was like, it was a lot going on. It was
What?
the vote to keep the government open. There was a motion to adjourn.
It was like the fog of war. I had to pull a fire alarm or something.
So I was just in a rush, man, you know, trying to get down the street. I was actually running to the Capitol at one point. So I was just in a hurry and didn't get a chance to do it. And, you know, yeah, so that was all my
It's a
bad.
scam.
And what about Republicans who are calling this out and saying,
I mean,
look, you
yeah.
had people who came into the Capitol building on January 6th.
Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, that's crazy.
Crazy. We need a full-blown select committee to investigate Jamal Bowman and to do it for months and months on end. And we have to air the footage in excruciating detail. We need to be airing it on broadcast television, network television. We need to preempt all of their coverage.
Immediately likening me to an insurrectionist and what happened on January 6th. I mean, this is what they do. They weaponize any opportunity they can. This is what they did in this situation, just so we don't
The
focus
guy who pulled the fire alarm is now, he's the victim now.
on their own dysfunction and destruction of their own party. So this is what they do.
And you're standing by your word that you did not have any intention to slow
Oh,
things. I mean,
hell no.
Democrats were trying to stall this vote on the
Hell
House
no.
floor.
Yeah, hell no. I mean, when I ran into
Hell no.
the Capitol, I went to go vote, and someone told me go downstairs. There's a meeting, so I didn't even know that meeting was taking place for the motion to.
I'm just an idiot. That's the excuse. I'm just a complete moron. Please don't blame me. I are dumb.
Motion to. I forgot what the vote was, but yeah. So no, absolutely not. Hell no.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right, thanks. I appreciate it.
Sufficient for what it
You know, I hate the confusion that it caused, and I really hate that, you know, Capitol Police and other resources had to be used to respond to this. So I'm really apologetic about that,
so
and I'm going
sorry.
to inform Capitol Police of that.
sent
Yeah,
him a letter.
I really hate that part. I'm glad no one was hurt or nothing like that took place. You know what I mean? So hopefully, you know, pay the fine. 3 months from now, it'll be dismissed, and I'll be able to just continue to serve my district.
You mean it'll be dismissed, like it'll be expunged from your record?
I believe so, yes.
That's the deal.
Yes, yeah.
With Capitol Police.
ACD, the DCAG.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, thank you.
Notice it's the DCAG handling. That's not the U.S. Attorney Matt Graves, the guy who's like destroying people's lives and then not enforcing any criminal laws in the city, which he's supposed to be doing. So here's some interesting stuff that's going on. One, you may know by now, I mentioned this yesterday, there's video out now showing Jamal Bowman on that day. All we had before was a still image of him grabbing the fire alarm and yanking it. And you're like, hey, that's Jamal Bowman. I know that guy. But now we've got the video. And in the video, Jamal Bowman arrives on the security camera. He walks up to the right door. He does look like he tries to push it for a second, and then he rips the signs off of the doors that say that these are doors are not to be opened. They're closed. And if you want to open them, you have to hold the push bar for a certain length of time in order to escape during an emergency. And so he takes both signs, he rips them off the doors, and then he turns back. This all takes place in, I'm telling you, from the moment he first touches the door. Okay, that's the 4th second of the video. He rips the sign down at second 5. Second 6, he rips the second sign down. Second 8, he pulls the fire alarm. Second 9, he walks away from the doors. Second 10, he's off camera. That's how quick it happens. In the course of 6 seconds, he touches the door, rips the signs down, pulls the fire alarm, and walks away. It's 6 seconds of time. It's a pretty quick sprint. He walks away. And he doesn't attempt to reopen the doors. So his whole claim, like, oh, I pulled the fire alarm because I was hoping that the doors would be opened if I pulled them. He pulls the fire alarm, and he walks away. Doesn't even try and open the doors. So that's a lie. That's a lie. And here's a new piece of information that's standing out to me. There's a great fella named Greg Ree. He's on Twitter, now X. He is a former producer for Tucker Carlson's Fox News show. He's an old colleague of mine. Smart guy. He's an attorney. He points this out today. He goes, hey, the sworn affidavit of the Capitol Police officer, Joseph McAtee, this is the guy who took Jamal Bowman's statement, omits any reference to Jamal Bowman tearing the emergency signs off the door before pulling the fire alarm. The affidavit also makes clear that Bowman lied in his interview with McAtee. U.S. Capitol Police committed a fraud on the court, says Gregory. Bowman's deferred prosecution agreement needs to be torn up, and he must face additional charges. Here's the full affidavit. And okay, so I just described some of what happened to you. Let's look at the full affidavit now. And in it, of course, you have the officer saying, okay, this is the investigation I conducted, and here's what I learned. Your affiant, that's the cop, advised the defendant of his position and agency of employment and asked the defendant if he knew anything about the fire alarm, to which the defendant said yes. When inquired as to what happened, the defendant stated that he was in the Cannon House office building at the second floor door, attempting to exit to Independence Avenue. Your affiant inquired if the defendant, that is Bowman, had an office in the building, and he stated he did, room 345. Your affiant requested that the defendant explain what he saw and what happened at the door. The defendant advised that the doors stated emergency exit only, push to open. He pushed on the door. It actually said more than that. He pushed on the door and pulled the lever next to it, which must have been the alarm. The defendant stated that the door still did not open, and he went to the first floor to exit. Okay, he didn't even attempt it. In the video footage, which, by the way, appears in this affidavit coming up, he didn't even attempt to open the door. So what do you mean the door did not open? He didn't try to open the door after he yanked the alarm. The defendant stated the door did not open and he went to the first floor to exit. Your affiant asked the defendant if he heard the alarm sounds or saw strobes, and he stated yes. The defendant was asked if he told anyone about this, and the defendant stated he didn't tell anyone, and that he was hurried because votes were called, and he didn't want to miss the votes to keep the government funded. The defendant advised that usually when votes are called, all the doors are open, and that door is usually open. The defendant further stated that this door was a usual door that he uses. The defendant advised that he then went to a Democrat meeting and a vote at the Capitol, and then the House Sergeant at Arms contacted him. Your affiant asked the defendant if he intended to cause a fire alarm, to which he stated no. Really? Because he pulled a fire alarm and he didn't try and exit the doors. He just yanked a fire alarm. The defendant was asked if he intended to cause a security concern, to which he stated no. The defendant was asked if he intended to disrupt or obstruct a congressional proceeding of federal administrative procedure, to which he stated no. After receipt of the personal address of the defendant stated that he was advised to not say anything else and obtain a lawyer. Your affiant ended the interview then at approximately 13:22 hours, 1:22 in the afternoon. And so then the cop says he then responded to the exit door after that, the one that was pushed and where the fire alarm was pulled. He said he observed that at the time there were 3 posted signs, one standing from the floor prior to the doors and 2 posted atop the push bars of the 2 doors. So I guess somebody came along and put the signs back up because Jamal Bowman ripped them down and threw them to the floor. And additionally, here's what it says. He said the first sign stands from the floor and it's red with white printed lettering that states emergency exit only. The second 2 signs posted atop each of the exit doors are red with white printed lettering that states emergency exit only, push until alarm sounds, 3 seconds. Door will unlock in 30 seconds. The red fire pull alarm located on the wall to the left of the doors, painted red with printed white lettering, states fire, push in, pull down, and his white logo of Notifier by Honeywell. He said then he went and looked at the security camera footage. This is the cop, the Capitol Police officer. And it revealed that on Saturday, September 30th at 12:04 hours, the defendant approached the exit door. He proceeded to push the right side exit door's push bar while grabbing the sign on it. Yeah, if he did, it was like a tap. You can see it in the video. He sort of does actually touch the bar for a moment. When the right side door did not open, the defendant then pushed the left side door push bar. That's not in the video. I'm watching. I've seen the video. I don't see that at all. He didn't push the left side door bar. That door did not open either. The defendant then turned to his left, looked at the emergency fire alarm pull station, and upon seeing it, he reached out and pulled the fire alarm down. Immediately afterwards, the defendant turned to his left, away from the exit doors. The defendant walked away from those doors without looking back at them or trying to push them open. That's true. That is true, that part of it. But what's not mentioned here, as Greg Reed points out, is that Bowman ripped the signs off of both doors and threw them to the ground. That's not even mentioned here. Why would you exclude that? That seems like a relevant detail. What is he up to? So, anyway, the Jamal Bowman saga, it's just, you kind of know how this goes. He's already got a sweetheart deal. He's already going to have it expunged from his record. A couple months from now, keep your nose clean, kid. No more fire alarms, and you'll be fine. And that's it. But don't you find that interesting that a Capitol Police officer who wrote up the whole report doesn't actually accurately depict what happened in the video? If it was a matter of something he had witnessed, by the way, it would make more sense to have a lapse in memory. If you're viewing something, have you ever done an experiment like this? Where you have to, or has anybody ever subjected you to an experiment like this? Where you engage in some sort of act and then a couple minutes later they're like, hey, okay, recount what just happened in the room you're sitting in right now. What was the color of the shirt that the guy was wearing? What door did he enter? What did he say? That kind of thing. It's like, it's a test of your memory, and not everybody gets it right. But if you're staring at a video, it's kind of obvious, Just write down what happened. How come you leave out that Jamal Bowman's like ripping signs off of doors and throwing them to the ground? And then in Jamal Bowman's statement, he lies to the police officer that, the door was supposed to open after he pulled the alarm. No such thing occurred. He turned, pulled the fire alarm, walked away. So that's what Jamal Bowman is up to this week. he's destined to get away with it. Just let's check in on the phones. We've got Mark calling in from Manassas now on line 2. Mark, good afternoon. You're on the Vince Coglianese Show.
Hey, Vince. How you doing, brother?
I'm good, Mark. What's on your mind, sir?
Hey, so, it's interesting that Jamal's defense of, hey, I'm not dishonest. I really am just that stupid.
Yeah.
But one thing you kind of neglected to mention, or maybe you mentioned it earlier and I didn't hear it, was he was a principal for like a dozen years. So he did fire drills probably monthly. That's what my son's school does. So he had to do like almost 100 fire drills over that time. So it would be interesting to look and see if any of his students set off a fire alarm and what punishment he may have doled out on that. you've got any investigative journalist connections over at the Daily Caller, perhaps.
Yeah. No, I'd love to know. I remember looking once. I didn't mention it today. I have mentioned it in prior iterations of our coverage of this whole stupid saga. But no question, he's a former principal. Obviously, he'd be very familiar with fire alarms and fire drills and how much a student would get in trouble if they actually pulled one. I mean, I don't know about you, Mark, but I remember like the idea that a student would ever even place their hands on a fire alarm. That was like the equivalent of like calling in a bomb threat. Don't you dare touch that unless there's an actual fire going on. That was like you just kept your hands away from fire alarms in school as a kid, but maybe something was different in Jamal Bowman's school.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've never heard of anybody over the age of 5 accidentally pulling a fire alarm. So maybe he is just that stupid. I don't know.
Yeah. No, it could be. You always got to factor that in. There's some percentage chance that it's just pure stupidity. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. No, it's an excellent point. It's an excellent point. This guy's he's a con artist. I mean, it's the idea. He didn't even try and push the door. The video is explicit on that subject. He yanks the fire alarm and runs off. So, what are we to conclude from that, other than the obvious? Joining us next is our good friend Joe Simonson from the Washington Free Beacon. He's got some reporting on these crazy lefties and how they are rooting on all of this terrorism, unfortunately, going on in the Middle East. Across the country, we're seeing this all over the place. The money that's energizing the terror glorification movement. Joe's been digging in. He'll tell us what he found. That's ahead on the Vince Coglianese Show. Good afternoon to you. 5:35 now, News Talk 105.9 WMAL, where we're making sense of the news. You can join us today, 888-630-9625, 888-630-WMAL. Always good to have you with us. A lot of craziness going on in the United States of America. A lot of not just terror apologism, but terror glorification going on in various cities and certainly on college campuses. What is energizing all of this, other than the steady drumbeat of insanity? What kind of money is behind all of this? That's a critical question. Among the reporters digging into that, Joe Simonson and Andrew Kerr. Half of that duo joins me now. Joe Simonson from the Washington Free Beacon. Joe, good to talk to you today.
Happy Friday, Vince.
Hey, sir. So tell me what's going on. You have a great piece today. It says this grassroots anti-Israel group is actually part of a left-wing dark money behemoth. And, when you see insanity going on around you, you always wonder, I'm like, who's pulling the strings here? What's the answer to that question?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and my report out today hopefully can provide some answers. So it's not uncommon when the left seizes on an issue for the day, whether it's hacking the Supreme Court. In this case, it's pro-Palestinian movement, but as you mentioned, in a lot of cases, that means glorifying Islamic terrorism. We see a bunch of pop-up groups come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
And protesters are very organized. They can seemingly get a lot of people in a certain location at a certain time very quickly. And in this case, this group called the Adala Justice Center, which, as an aside, Adala means justice in Arabic, so it's the Justice Center.
Mm-hmm.
But the Adala Justice Center is part of the Tide Center. Now, the Tide Center is one of the largest left-wing dark money groups in the nation. It's funded by, of course, George Soros, Pierre Omidyar, the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation, all the biggest names I think Warren Buffett's brother gives them money as well. All the biggest names in left-wing billionaire politics.
Oh, it's wild. So when you mentioned George Soros, of course, when you say Tide Center, everybody, anybody who's watched their influence peddling through the years knows that George Soros heavily funds them. And one of the things is, like, when you bring up Soros, the left through the years has said, well, it's anti-Semitic to mention George Soros. You're not allowed to mention his influence peddling. You're not allowed to mention anything. which is crazy to me. So if I understand this correctly, the Jewish guy is supporting the Tide Center, which is funding operations to glorify the terror attack on Israel. Make it make sense.
It's not just that the Tide Center is funding this, and this is what's significant about my report today. This group, the Adalah Justice Center, which was circulating petitions within hours of Hamas's attack on Israeli civilians, saying you must stand in solidarity, but also circulating images online of Hamas's bulldozers, saying this is so wonderful. They are part of the Tide Center. So that is a significant escalation, I guess one could say, from what we traditionally see, because you see a lot of these pro-Palestinian groups pop up, and it turns out George Soros cut them a check in 2019, whatever. These people who work at Adalah, again, organizing these protests, circulating pro-Hamas imagery, literally for legal purposes, are employees of Tide. So to me, that means Pierre Omidyar should be directly implicated in this. It should mean George Soros should be directly implicated in this. This group is one of the most reprehensible that we've seen. We've seen like Jewish Voices for Peace and groups like that, and they're just calling for a ceasefire. We can debate whether, you know, how crazy or not that is. This group in particular is in favor of Hamas, celebrating within hours of Israel is still counting the dead, of how wonderful of an act of resistance this was.
Do you get the sense that there's anybody on the left who's willing to say out loud that this is a terrible idea? I know that there's clearly some division among Democrats right now, a bit of infighting right now, whether or not Israel's even worth supporting. There are Democrats who do support Israel, clearly, but this is a major money machine for the left. Will they say anything about this?
Well, it's interesting, Vince. So the way Tide works is that a bunch of rich Democrats give money to Tide. Tide is about $1 billion, I think, under management. And the way dark money works is that, you know, we know that George Soros, for example, gave money to Tide for Palestinian-related causes, but they don't have to disclose. And this Adalah Justice Center, because it is part of Tide, even though it doesn't go around saying, hey, we're the Tide Foundation, doesn't have to say who exactly earmarked that money. So when we went out and asked, hey, Pierre Omidyar, do you give money? Did you earmark money for this? They say, we don't support this. George Soros doesn't respond. The Rockefeller Foundation doesn't respond. The Ford Foundation doesn't respond. So by their omission, I mean, we even asked Pierre Omidyar, fine, you don't give money, you know, you didn't earmark money for this. Do you condemn this message? No, they wouldn't answer.
It's insane to me. Look, you can only really draw like one conclusion from that, though, because, you know, if it is the easiest thing in the world to do, to condemn terrorism. You can say, look, there's a dispute over land and I support this side of it, or I think the Israelis are being too aggressive, whatever. You can say whatever you want. But in the wake of a terror attack, where the battle lines are super clear. It's not like this is a difficult call. This is like really obvious stuff. If you can't condemn it, what you're signaling to the public is that actually I support it.
I mean, of course, Vince. I mean, can you imagine getting a call from the New York Times and say, "Hey, Vince, by the way, what do you think of Nazis?"
Yeah, I mean, contemptible. Obviously,
you might balk at the question.
Yeah,
you might balk at the question, but I think, you know.
No question. Yeah, no question. It's bizarre to me. I mean, part of it is obviously like they're upset that they got caught. They're upset that it's the Washington Free Beacon that's doing the catching, and then they think to themselves, well, if we don't respond, that we don't have to dignify this reporting. But your reporting is dead on accurate. Nobody's disputing it.
No, absolutely not. And if I give the most charitable explanation for what is possibly going on here, is that you're George Soros, you're Ford Foundation, whoever, you're the biggest names in left-wing dark money. You are giving out tens of millions of dollars every year. And you look at these young people and say, oh, well, isn't this so great? We have to support the youth. We have to support, these great young activists. And then you wake up one day and you find out that these people who you're paying, they're on your, you're paying your salary every day, turn out to be basically Islamic extremists. And I think it's a very awkward position. I mean, it wouldn't surprise. I don't think necessarily George Soros is checking in every day on what the dozens of groups, hundreds potentially, groups he funds. And
yes, and I know you're trying to give the most generous possible interpretation as a hypothetical, but it is strange to me that if, as a Jewish man, you would be giving all of this money to an organization that's dedicated to the destruction of the Jewish people in Israel, and then be like, oh, I was ignorant of what they were up to. Like that honestly doesn't in any way pass a smell test. Do you think?
No, other than trying to get into the psyche of someone like George Soros, that's the best I can do.
Yeah.
But I think you're absolutely right. You look at this and you're like, couldn't you just give money to the homeless? What do you do?
That would be constructive. That would be something that would be useful, and not destructive, which is what Soros seems to have dedicated his life to. Do you think the tide is turning? Not to use the phrase tides on purpose, but do you think that the tide is turning on this subject at all? I'm watching as at these college campuses everywhere, you have people openly cheering on the terror. But all of a sudden, some of the administrators and some of the people around these institutions are starting to say, wait, this makes us look like freaks. Maybe we shouldn't be so openly supporting terrorism against Israel.
Well, right. I think money's at the heart of a lot of this. I don't think that university administrators woke up one day after years and years and years of allowing students to chant on campus, we need to get rid of the colonizers. And then one day they realized, oh, that means us. Also, I think a lot of it's just that you have a lot of donors reading the news and being like, what the hell's going on? I've given you $30 million, and now apparently your students want to kill me. So this relationship can't keep working out, and I think administrators are in a lot of are in an awkward position because they've been fostering this sort of climate for so long, happily, gleefully. And by the way, I don't think they would change. We would be seeing a reversal from administrators if donors weren't speaking up. This is not because they grew a spine one day. But I, on the other hand, when I look at Tides giving money to these groups and all these protests around the country, and they're astroturf. They're not real grassroots organizations. They're the product of left-wing billionaires. And by the way, just as a side note, the irony here is that all these people in these groups are also members of the Democratic Socialists of America. So they're being paid by billionaires to be socialists. But that concerns me too, because it's there's just so much money out there now on the left, where these things have just taken a life of their own. You would think the minute this report comes out, my report comes out, hey, by the way, George Soros, this organization that you give a lot of money to, they're in favor of Islamic terrorism, do you have any regrets about that? You would think overnight that group would disappear, which Tides could do. Tides could shut down this group tomorrow. They're employees of Tides for legal purposes, and they haven't done it. Maybe that'll happen Monday. Who knows? I'm not holding my breath. But that's what's scary to me. I mean, this is just such an easy question. Should you want these people associated with you? And the answer right now is, I don't care.
One other piece here that I think is worth bringing up. This shouldn't be just measured in isolation. You have George Soros and other left-wing billionaires supporting Hamas by way of the organizations that they fund. They keep coming up in the most destructive so-called social movements that happen. Every moral panic seems to be funded in part by the same guys. So whether it's the Black Lives Matter riots in 2020, whether it's climate chaos, whether it's illegal immigrants pouring into our country, there's always these touch points where you have these big left-wing billionaires who are funding the chaos side of that equation.
And I think that's exactly right, and it speaks to the point I was just trying to make, where you would think if you're George Soros and you have such a migrant crisis, I mean, you have illegal aliens living on the streets of New York in squalor, many of them, you might pause and say, maybe this isn't working. If you're funding essentially communists who are endorsing Islamic terrorism, you might pause, but we're not seeing any evidence of that. And that's the disturbing thing about all of it.
Well, that says something about what you actually want and what outcome you actually desire. It turns out maybe they're delivering exactly what you wanted in the first place, unfortunately. Hey, Joe Simonson over at the Washington Free Beacon, please keep up the great work, and thank you as always for the conversation. Thank you, sir.
Have a great weekend, Vince. Good
to talk to you. This Joe Simonson. Well, Joy Behar's an idiot. I don't know if you know. I don't know if I didn't really even have to tell you that, to be honest. You would be able to conclude it by listening to her at any given moment. She was on television today, and as often happens, when the left sees death, they look to exploit it to induce more, unfortunately. Here is Joy Behar today talking about guns, and she says that the AR-15 is so destructive that if you shoot a deer with it, you can't eat the deer because there's basically no animal left. This is Joy Behar today.
Sarah didn't get a chance to weigh in on the topic of what happened in Maine and AR-15s.
Yeah, I would love to see an assault weapons ban. Like President Reagan, I don't believe they're a sport or hunting instrument. It's like shooting fish in a bucket, but that's my
But also if you...
Who says shooting fish in a bucket? What that? It's in a barrel. Their idioms are screwed up.
It's like shooting fish in a bucket, but that's my
But also if you shoot with an AR-15, let's say you shoot a deer, you can't eat it. Because you basically demolish
In addition to that, but the hunt is about an actual difficult process, not massacring bodies of any kind. But my point is, I'd love to see that.
She has no idea what she's talking about. That's like it's literally the opposite of the truth. The AR-15 fires a 5.56 or 2.23 round. It is too small, typically, to be the type of round that you would normally use to go deer hunting. Although one of the great stories is a couple years back we did some coverage of when I was doing the morning show here on WMAL. We were covering how in Arlington, they were thinning the deer population. And the way that they do that is they'll put the police, the local Arlington cops will get up in deer stands, and the snipers will get some training on the deer, and they'll shoot AR-15s at the deer. But the way they do it, I asked about this. I was like, wasn't that round a little small to stop a deer, to kill a deer, which is what you're trying to do? And he said, well, yeah, normally, but we aim for the head. They do sharpshooting at the head of these deer. I was like, this is the kind of information people need to know. This is why I'm here on WMAL asking the questions. I really wanted, I was like, what are you doing with AR-15 shooting a deer? So here's Joy Behar being like, there's just nothing left. And you know what's funny? Not funny, but an interesting component to this. Not only do they shoot the deer, then they turn the deer over to be cleaned and then given to the homeless. They feed people with the deer that they kill as they're calling them in Arlington. So... No, Joy Behar is wrong on literally every count on this clip. They use an AR-15. It blows the deer up. There's nothing left. There's nothing to eat. You can't even eat it. They demolished the animal. And then that woman, Sarah Haynes, is like, well, yes, of course, obviously. What a world. What a mindless world. And these people are like, the information delivery vehicle for how many millions of people? Oh, I see. There's no deer left. Hey, the great one, Mark Levin, knows everything, and he's up next right here on the legendary WMAL. Have a great weekend. Mark's up here.